Fantastic. See attendees logging on. Great. All right, it is 9 o'clock on Friday, June 25th. Welcome everybody to today's Maine Broadband Coalition Regional Broadband Dialogues Kickoff. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Andrew Butcher. I serve as Director of Innovation and Resilience for the Greater Portland Council of Governments. In that capacity, I serve as the staffing for the Maine Broadband Coalition. It is a pleasure to be with you all this morning. We have excellent representation throughout the state of Maine, I believe with representation from almost every county in the state. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to just start really quickly and give an overview of our purpose and goals for today's discussion and the intent of these regional dialogues. And then I'll be handing over to our panelists for today, and I'll be introducing them. Before I get started on the overview of our purpose and goals for today, I do want to just frame that I think we're going to spend probably the first 45 minutes today talking about why broadband is important and why this is something that we should care about. Before we do that, I recommend that we go through a year-long global pandemic to illustrate why working from home and visiting with your healthcare professionals from afar and enabling distance learning is so important. So, I'm sorry, everybody, we've just gone through that. I don't know that we'll need to spend time today talking about why broadband is important. That is why all of you are here today. This is not a discussion about why broadband is important. You're here because you already know. Thanks, Scott. You already know this is a discussion around how do we make the most out of a tremendous opportunity right now, and how do we work across municipal jurisdiction, how do we work across sector, how do we engage a diversity of stakeholders, how can we stack capital in the most effective way to enable the broadband connectivity that we as a state need, and what does that look like at a regional level. One of the great things I'll say about talking about broadband is that we all come to it from a different perspective and with a different level of knowledge. There are few humans on the planet that have the level of broadband knowledge that folks like Peggy Schaefer and Kindred Joe Grindle and Mia Purcell have. And so not all of us need that level of deep technical awareness around process and policy and technology. The purpose for today's conversation for all of you is to think about how can you go about to your region, your area of priority, and engage a diversity of stakeholders and facilitate a new approach to broadband planning and development that makes the most out of engagement, whether it's including your school districts, whether it's incorporating your county administrations, whether it's working with multiple municipalities. Again, our lens of focus for today is on regional approach. And so as a result, our flow of the conversation is that we are in a different landscape as we recover from the pandemic. And so we do need to spend a little bit of time with an overview of that landscape, in particular from a federal funding standpoint, as it pertains to where Maine is at. And then spend a minute talking about why regional broadband planning and development is so critical and so important. And so I appreciate Peggy Schaefer from the Connect Maine Authority and Nick Batista from the Island Institute and Connect Maine Authority and Broadband Coalition to kick off that portion of the conversation. Once we emerge from there, we're going to spend a couple minutes sort of picking apart existing regional models and lessons learned and insights from both the Maine West region as well as the Greater Franklin County efforts for broadband. And so thank you, Mike Wilson, Mia Purcell, and Charlie Woodworth for facilitating that portion of the conversation, which will be moderated by Kendra Jo Grindle from the Island Institute. And after that, we're going to be spending some time thinking about considerations for multi-sector engagement. So part of the intent for today from a Broadband Coalition standpoint was to bring together unique perspectives from economic development districts, school districts, health districts, chambers of commerce, emergency management, county agencies, municipalities. And so we're going to have a medley of speakers giving a very, very quick tidbit of perspective around how best to engage their sector and their types of agencies. And so that is we're gonna finish up the session with a lightning round of essentially 3 to 4 minutes per participant. So as we get started, I do just wanna underscore and thank our sort of cadre of hosts here today. Certainly appreciate the FEMA Region 1 COVID-19 Long-Term Recovery Task Force, of which the Broadband Coalition is facilitating a solutions-based team. I'd like to thank the Maine Municipal Association, Maine School Management Association, Maine School Board Association, Maine School Superintendents Association, Maine State Chamber of Commerce, Maine County Commissioners Association, Network Maine, Connect Maine, Maine Emergency Management Association, and Maine Public Health Association. So again, that was a lot of co-hosts. So thanks everyone for bearing with me, but this is, I think, a really, really exciting way in which the Broadband Coalition is trying to tap into that diversity of stakeholders. All right, we've got a tight hour and a half here. There's going to be time for Q&A throughout. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom menu. And let's get started with some substance. Peggy, I am going to hand to you first to give a few minutes of breakdown of federal funding and ARPA rules. And if you wouldn't mind, let's add the challenge of a power outage for you to have this conversation by your hotspot connection.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, good morning. I hope you can hear me. I had to move outside because I have a house that's made of cement, so I don't actually get a cell section inside. So it's, you know this, everybody, you live life, you have hotspots, right? So I'm working off my 1 bar cellular connection on this. So that's why I have no video. I think Andrew's going to share the PowerPoint. So this is of it. Oh, I'm just going to give a sort of a quick, hopefully, overview of the federal funding that's happened in the last 6 months. There is potentially more coming, but this is what we know about now. And so this is there were 2 acts. One is called the American Rescue Plan that was passed in March, and another one, I don't think it had a name, but it was passed in December. So the American Rescue Plan is the one that most people have been talking about. And this has sort of 3 tranches of money that can be used for broadband. One is the state funds, one is local and county funds, and one is capital funds. I put these numbers next to them because that's where they are in the bill. They're section 602, 603, and 604. So it's a bit of a shorthand for me to refer to them that way, but that's so next screen. So the state funds and the capital projects fund. The capital projects fund is a fund that's going to be passed through Treasury, which is unusual for broadband. Because of how it was added in the language of the bill, it's not very specific. It says it's supposed to be to carry out critical capacity capital projects, directly enabling work, education, and health monitoring, including remote options. So Treasury is interpreting this to mean that whatever this money is spent on, it has to address all of those things, which is important because broadband is the only thing that actually addresses all of those things. So that means that the Treasury's given the signal that the money will be going strictly to broadband. It's distributed on a formula basis, and Maine's formula is about 129 million, which we've been around for 12 years, and we've up until this last year we've given about $12 million out over those times. So 129 is 10 times that. So we are expecting the guidance from Treasury in October. It will likely include what areas are eligible, and that will be the typical way the federal government does, which is defining it by the access to broadband at a certain speed level. Likely they will use the FCC speed level, which is 25 megabits per second down and 3 megabits per second up. So if your area is under that, these funds can be used in your area. If it's over that, we're going to have a discussion. And that's one of the major problems with all this federal funding. So the state funding, the governor, this is, I think it's like 1.2 billion for the entire state package. And the governor has put together a very wide ranging plan to address the impact of the pandemic. The plan is right now before the legislature for final approval. 21 million of that will be going to broadband. And again, the legislation requires it addresses the impacts as a result of COVID. And the Treasury guidance is out on this funding. And I'll get to that in a minute. That's on another slide. Next slide. So the next piece is the county and town funding. And this is the funding that has gotten some level of attention, where each town at each county is getting not an insignificant chunk of cash. And that funding can be used for a whole variety of things. And one of those things is infrastructure, broadband, water, and sewer. And so I'm going to focus obviously on broadband because I think all of the money should go to broadband. But there are a whole host of ways that these funds can be used. And the decision making on this, which is important, the decision making on how it's going to be used is at the county level for county funds and at the town level for town funds, right? These are not state directed. These are not federally directed. And there's a wide variety of things they can be used for, one of which is broadband infrastructure. And the wording around the broadband infrastructure, the guiding around the broadband infrastructure has changed in the last week. Originally, it said 25.3 as a reliable 25.3 is the definition. And as a result of questions that people have asked, the Treasury has come out with a clearer picture of what they mean by that, which is that one or more households in a business in an area to be served has access to wireline broadband that can actually and consistently meet the specific thresholds of at least 25 megabits per second down and 3 up. These are underserved and unserved households or businesses, and it's importantly, the underserved ones are not the only ones in the service area that can be funded by this project. So what these two lines mean, and Treasury has more guidance on this, but what they essentially says is that you have to be consistently, every household has to consistently be able to get 25/3. And that your project area can be larger than just the unserved areas. This is unusual for federal funds. It's a big door. It's really very welcomed. It means that when you're putting together a project for using these funds, the funds can also be used in areas that have better than 25.3 service. So that's that. I can't tell you how big that is. It is huge. It is, often when I do these little speeches, I talk about you need to go through the willies to get through the wags. This fund can help pay for the willies as well as the wags, right? So you could use this funding to expand service as part of a network build that serves unserved areas as well as areas that have some level of service. There is a preference for community-based solutions, including public ownership. Again, the money's coming through towns and counties. And it's not hard and fast, but they would like to see the funds be directed to community-based solutions. They really would like to see a build, meaning what you are building to be a symmetrical speed of 100/100 service. So that's a high quality service that can be scalable. That's really important. This is federal funding that we're not likely to see again. So it's really important that we build infrastructure that's going to take us out and be essentially good for 20 or 30 years. The federal guidance sets the floor to allow local implementation, including affordability criteria. So this money doesn't only have to be used for infrastructure. It can also be used within your community to develop an affordability program, to provide devices, all those kinds of things that you need to actually use the wire that's running by your house. And importantly, you have to commit the funding by the end of 2024 and your project needs to be complete by 2026. So what this line means is that you have time to think about this and implement a strategy that works for your community. There's no like immediate rush for you to get out and spend this money next week. You have until 2024 to commit the funding, until 2026 to build it. So those are two really important elements. Next. Yeah. So 25 megabits per, it's a speed measure that it tells you sort of the quality of your service. And Andrew can talk about speed testing and how you know that, right? I mean, we have a whole speed testing thing on the Maine Broadband Coalition. You can go to that and test your speed and see what it is. So the second piece of funding I'm going to talk about is the NTIA funding. And this was funding that was created in December of this past year. And there were sort of three chunks of money. One of which is a broadband infrastructure process that is about 288 million nationally. So it's not a lot of money. It will be very competitive. My sister's leaving. Oh, Ginny, I'm on a Zoom call. Get out of here. Sorry. So the project size is between 5 and 30 million. Now, the piece about this, it's really the way the NTIA has structured this is that they would like a public instrumentality of the state to be the lead entity on applying for this. So we as a state looked at it and thought about, you know, if a town or a community needs to be the lead application, are they likely to do that? Because the federal grants are not a small lift. And will they have projects that are big enough to fit into this project size? So based on that, we are putting forward a process to create a state application. So we're having an RFI right out now. So the communities and providers that are interested in being part of this process can tell us that they're interested, and we'll see if we can put them in a package that's very competitive for the national funding. So the priorities for funding are set by the federal government. They are to serve the greatest number of households in an eligible area. Oh, good, it's going to start to rain. And they have to provide service to rural areas. They must be cost effective in providing broadband service. And again, the broadband service they prefer a minimum of 100 megabits per second down and 20 up, but they would prefer a faster speed. So those are the eligibility lenses that we're going to be looking through when we look at these people who would like to join. And I do know that the first one, which is the number of households served, and the second one, how rural it is, do sort of conflict, but we're going to have to work our way through that one. So that is that program. It requires a 10% match. Again, the goal of this funding is that the projects are built out within a year. So in order to be part of our state grant, you really need to be ready right now because the application has to go in on the 17th of August. Next slide. So this is our RFI that we have out. It's on our webpage. The questions are due the 26th, which I think is today, tomorrow. The responses are due the day after the 4th of July holiday. Communities can still apply to NTI on their own if they want to, if they choose not to be part of the state application. So that's still an option for communities. And importantly, at our board meeting on Wednesday, our board voted to provide a 10% match for community-owned projects that are submitted and selected. There is a limit on that. It's about 7.5 million. And so we, because the program requires a 10% match, and because it's very hard for communities in 2 months to pull together 10% of a project, we at Connect Maine are going to provide that match for a community-led project or community-owned project. Next. So there's more federal funding coming. Yesterday, there was a somewhat of agreement between 20 senators and the president for for the American Jobs Plan, the infrastructure plan. And that is, I think what we're looking at, there's about 65 million for broadband, 65 billion, excuse me, 14 billion of that will go through the USDA Reconnect program. About 45 billion of that is going to go hopefully through state programs. That's the way it's set up right now. There's about 5 billion for an affordability piece and 6 billion to fund private activity bonds, which is a very interesting idea. I looked at the funding, if they use, so Senator King has a bill in called the Bridge Act. And he and the other sponsors of the Bridge Act have been active members of this small group that's been negotiating, this group of 21 senators. If it follows the Bridge Act, it is a significant chunk of money coming to Maine. And so all eyes on that for the next, 6 weeks until they resolve that. The other piece that happened in the recent package is the emergency broadband benefit. This is run through the FCC, and it underwrites the cost of individuals' internet connection for up to $50 a month. It is run through providers, so people who are eligible, and a whole variety of eligibility, including school lunch and all kinds of stuff, have to apply through a internet provider. And so that program has rolled out mid-April, and it will go until that money runs out or until Congress refunds it. So there's been a lot of publicity around this, but it's really important that we help people get connected to it. The challenge, which is the typical sort of FCC challenge, is that the sign up is online, which is hard to do if you don't have an internet connection. And it's through the FCC website, which is a very difficult website to go through. You can also go through your provider. So that's an important piece for communities to know, to push out to community members who can't get broadband because they can't afford it. Next. That's it. Yep, that's it. So I'll happy to take questions now or later.
So thank you, Peggy. There definitely, I think, questions as we go will be welcome. I do see that Bill van Dyson asks, can the county and town money be used as a match against other grants?
No, feds are really bad about, so here, let me say, not say no. You cannot use the county and fed money to match an NTIA grant. But we don't know about the treasury money at the capital relief projects yet, but you can use all of that money to match Connect Maine money. So while the feds have frowned heavily on using federal money to match federal money, we are very agnostic about this. Money is money. And so you can absolutely use the Fed, you can pile up that federal money and match our state money and match the federal money that we are also getting from the Fed. So yes, you can do that.
Excellent. I know that there's probably more questions bubbling, but I do want to be mindful of our admittedly limited time today. And I'm going to hand actually to Nick Batista from the Island Institute to speak through why regional planning and considerations are so critical. Thanks, Nick, for joining.
Thank you. This is great. So jumping right in, regional planning is important in large part because we're talking about building networks with broadband. And so planning them at a scale larger than municipality allows you to think about and design a network that makes sense and is more effective and affordable from a network design perspective. This is place-based infrastructure. And so if you're looking at just the geography of your town, you might be able to more effectively serve part of your town by going through another town or by coming in. It might be easier you might have a better network if you're putting a couple of towns together to reach an area. I think that's sort of like general why regional planning makes sense in Maine. We know a lot of reasons why regional planning is challenging, but when it comes to broadband, I think it's really important to remember that it's a network, it's place-based infrastructure, and then a couple other factors. There's a lot happening in the state right now and in the US around broadband. An active and engaged broadband committee might not be enough to get the attention of a provider. They're looking to expand where it makes sense for their business. And so if you're looking at working with a private sector partner, whether it's they own the infrastructure or you own the infrastructure, you're competing with all of the other communities in the state, all of the other communities around the country who are looking to expand broadband and build networks. And so if your neighbors are going forward with a project and you're going forward with a project, there could be many different projects going forward, all of which have a lot of time and attention needed from a provider to start engaging with them. And so the more that you can make it easier for a provider to say, to stand up and say, we're here, we've got a group of us together, come talk to us all at once, and we can figure out what makes sense, that makes you more attractive for many providers. And so they're looking at it as is this going to lead to business options or opportunities for them? And I think heading into the last round of the Connect Maine Authority grants, we heard from Charter that they were looking at or talking to something like 80 different projects in Maine. Might have been an entire community, might have been a road or a road association or a small expansion. That's a lot of projects. A handful came forward for the Connect Maine process, but I think it's just worth, it's not just what's happening in your community, it's what's happening in your community times all of the other communities that are interested in broadband and all of the other people on this call who are very interested in broadband. Regional conversations can help aggregate these conversations. And then I think the last point is on the business side of things, these are assets that generate revenue, and a provider expanding their network looks at the business case differently than somebody coming in and building a standalone network. If you're building a network that is publicly owned, you probably want to do more service than just what is in the unserved area. That might not be an economically viable network to build. Building a bigger network, as Peggy was talking about, could improve the business case. A regional approach might allow you to cover enough people or enough areas where it's dense enough that you can afford to also cover the underserved areas. And a locally owned network, I think it's just also worth saying that a locally owned network would be competing with potentially privately owned networks in a number of the more densely populated areas of the state. And some of the assumptions that often get made in the broadband planning world for unserved areas about take rates and things like that, they may change if it's a municipally owned network or community owned network in a denser area where there's a little bit more competition. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be thinking about it, but it is a factor to raise and to consider. And so a whole bunch of reasons on the broadband side why looking at the regional perspective makes sense, and a small note of caution.
So thank you, Nick. Always appreciate your perspective and insight. And, I think one of the big things I'm hearing you say, and we've talked about it as a broadband coalition in a couple of different ways, and that its size matters. This is really a matter of increasing the scale of uptake of service, getting the attention of service providers, which also creates efficiencies in process, and also creates new opportunities for regions to explore building out and expanding networks in places where there's already service, as well as addressing the places that are in need and are unserved or underserved. And I think that, again, one of the joys of this conversation about a regional dialogue approach is these are important lenses of consideration for each attendee to take back with them to their places that they are having conversations with their partners, and to be thinking about some of the value and the positive sides of thinking about multi-jurisdictional, multi-sector collaborations. And to that effect, I do want to just highlight that this is an amazing attendance crowd. We had 91 registrations for this morning, and there are 90 participants here. So really well done, everybody. Nick, any final comments before I hand to Kendra Jo?
I think it's worth listening to the things that you hear from the communities that are coming up, from the regions that have gone forward. There's a lot of value in working at the regional level and particularly planning at the regional level. I think, as the number of people in the state who are looking at broadband and able to support conversations about broadband and dive deeply into thinking about network design and how some of these projects come together, we're going to quickly run into capacity limitations as a state. So working regionally makes a lot of that easier.
I think one of the best ways to sort of consider that is to pick apart and to think about those insights relevant to some existing examples and initiatives of regional models in the state. And for those of you that are just getting to know the Maine Broadband Coalition for the first time, we are a statewide network of organizations, governmental agencies, nonprofits, private companies, and regional initiatives with a shared commitment towards affordable, accessible, reliable, universal internet service for everyone in Maine, no exceptions. And so as such, as an informal network, I serve as the staffing capacity in my role at the Greater Portland Council of Governments, and partners like the Island Institute serve as a cornerstone in our technical expertise, our awareness around community-driven process. And so the Island Institute has done incredible work across the state in helping advance a community-driven process, to which I will hand to Kendra Jo Grindle to facilitate our next portion of the conversation. Thank you, Kendra Jo.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. I am Kendra Jo Grindle. I'm the lead for our broadband team at the Island Institute and a senior community development officer. And I'm just going to lead this next portion where you're going to actually hear from a couple of leaders when it comes to regional efforts, whether it's on the planning side or all the way through to implementation. So we're going to hear first from Charlie Woodworth, who's the executive director of the Greater Franklin Development Council. When we think about county action, I always think of Charlie and the process that he's been able to lead in Franklin County and the role that he's been able to serve, pulling communities together. And then Mike Wilson, the Senior Program Director for Northern Forest Center, and you'll potentially hear from Mia as well, Mia Purcell, Vice President of Economic Development Impact at the Community Concepts Finance Corporation. Both Mike and Mia together are leaders of Maine West, which is a partnership of organizations working in the region spanning Bethel, Rumford, Mexico, and Oxford Hills area in Maine. And they've been incredible partners, really pulling together the communities in that area through some planning, a boot camp process, and all Charlie, Mike, Mia. I think what they highlight when you look at regional is the need for that local capacity that understands these communities, understands the economics, the municipal leadership, and the social kind of fabric of those communities to help pull everyone together and keep everyone focused and moving forward towards a common goal. So I'm going to hand it over to Charlie first, and then we'll circle back to Mike afterwards.
Great. How's that?
Perfect.
Perfect. All right. So thanks, Kendra Jo. All right. So first off, our project began as a county-wide study. We are 22 towns, 13 townships, unorganized townships. And we could apply for one community, maybe two, but that doesn't get us very far. Our challenge, it's systemic. We don't have the population base to draw providers in. So if we can band together, we're adding scale. And as Nick mentioned, economies of scale. In our case, our smaller towns are gaining comfort from the fact that their larger neighboring town is on board or will be on board. And so larger towns have capacity, they have town managers, they've got select boards that are professionals in the world and bring that perspective. So that's how we started. Also understanding that our solutions are recognizing these are public-private partnerships. Towns have to invest in themselves in order to attract investment from others, whether it's providers, the state, or federal government. So what are the principles that we see for regional collaboration? First off, you need a local champion, as Kendra mentioned, to manage the process, to inform, provide, and have answers to all of those questions. Extensive outreach to elected officials and then to citizens, getting them to recognize the many opportunities that we've come to know this last 15 months, but the many opportunities that connecting communities provides, the societal, the health, the education, the overall community connection, and then obviously the economic, the remote work, the growing population. We have shrinking populations here in Western Maine. That is the death knell. We need to attract people to move here, want to be here. We're lucky we have natural resources that are spectacular, but we need a little connectivity to go along with that. So those economic outcomes would be a broader tax base if people move here, and the resulting benefits of that. And then third, developing broadband committees in each town. This messaging needs to be neighbors talking to neighbors. It can't just be the voice from away or the local champion. Even though I don't live in the town next door, I'm from away. And so they've got to be hearing from their own neighbors, their kids, their grandkids, what connectivity means to them. How are you approaching the data-driven side of broadband planning? So understanding where existing gaps and needs are. Well, one way is to hire a professional, get out and drive the roads. You need to know who your ISPs are. You need to know what their technology is. Is it DSL? Is it coax? And what are their offerings? What are the packages? What are the speeds they're selling and for what price? And that can be done either with a consultant that does this, or you can do it yourself, but there's a learning curve. Develop and deploy surveys per town. I can't speak to the value of this. It really it gets the towns to understand what their citizens are saying. And then you need to provide an analysis of those surveys. I do have one slide. Andrew, if you could pull that up. It's an example of our survey. And if you can't, that's okay. All right, so this one page, it's one of, I think, 21 slides in our survey. So number of hours per day spent using internet, and all responses are averaged. So this is for the town of Wilton. But the takeaway here is the number of hours per day that would be spent using internet if high-speed internet were available. And what we're seeing here is productivity increases. So personal use goes down. Business use goes up by 11%. Education goes up by almost 7%. Healthcare up by 100%. So the productivity per household, the economic productivity, it's pretty telling. And we saw this with all of our other towns as well. So, all right, enough of that slide. So let's see here, hold on. So anyway, surveys. And so very valuable. And then anecdotal. The meetings of elected officials and citizens, you get to hear who has what sort of service. And then finally, has been referenced, is the live interactive Maine Broadband Coalition speed test map. That reinforces what you're already finding out on the ground as you drive the roads and talk to neighbors, or get neighbors to talk to neighbors and report into you. But you can develop your own maps. But this live interactive map from the Broadband Coalition is it's a marvel. It's fantastic, and it's going to be a very valuable tool in defending our applications, all of our applications, in defending who's got what service. 25/3, we wish. So it's very helpful, and it's current. So challenges we're experiencing in our work, looking at a process as a whole, and where are we getting stuck? Who's getting stuck? This thing just greased skids. Everyone wants it. Nobody wants to pay for it. So broadband is a complex topic. It's a complex language. And I have found that it requires the steady drip in messaging to keep people current and engaged. And you want to be able to broaden that. So it's not just you with the steady drip. It's your community broadband committees speaking to their neighbors. Can't reinforce that enough. Others have to be saying the message and comprehending it. And then attracting providers, that's a little, you wouldn't get stuck with that. Incumbents, they should be, and they are, they would be the low cost solution for upgrades, but they're the last people to come to the table. They will not come to the table, and there may be some here, and but they won't come to the table until they feel as though someone's going to eat their lunch. So you can, if you have a good study, you can attract providers from away with their plans. And they can, because of the work that you're doing their homework for them to some degree, and they can run their P&Ls. So, and if they're coming, then the incumbent you might be getting their attention, and they might come with some solutions. So, but we have to do the work ourselves. So with good data, you got a chance of attracting providers. And once this happens, we may hear from our incumbents. So really the challenge is getting the towns and citizens to recognize the return on investment. As I mentioned, everyone wants something for nothing, but in order to attract other investors, towns need to show they're willing to invest in themselves. That's all I've got.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Charlie. I really appreciate you digging into that. We've definitely seen the power of clear messaging, concise, and just repetitive through the communities across the state have led this forward. So now we're going to shift to Mike Wilson, who it wouldn't be a broadband call if there wasn't somebody on a hotspot, somebody in a car, somebody's got to drop off. So
how can you tell I'm in a car?
It might have been the seatbelt earlier. I'm not sure.
So am I on? Am I good?
You're good.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone. So again, my name is Mike Wilson. I'm the Senior Program Director for the Northern Forest Center. We're a regional nonprofit working on rural economic and community development programs all across northern Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and New York. So when we talk about region as an organization, we work at a very big regional scale, but in this case, we're really focusing on, as Kendra Jo said, a project we've been working with Mia Purcell and Community Concepts Finance Corporation in what we call the Maine West area. And I'll use that as context because our dive into broadband work grew directly from the Maine West Initiative, which is a partnership with the Betterment Fund, really specifically focused on a regional approach to increasing connectivity and collaboration across the economic, education, health, and conservation sectors in northern Oxford County, Maine. So our whole, kind of looking ahead to later in the agenda, our whole initiative grew directly from a recognition that broadband was an issue that cut across all of these issues, and that it made sense to think about it at a regional scale. That said, it's kind of the big picture points that I would point to is that I'll focus on here. One is capacity. Working regionally, working anywhere takes capacity, and regional collaboration is not always a natural thing for folks, and it requires capacity and nurturing and care and feeding. The other is readiness. It's something we've run into of we can't force people into this. We can't do this for people until communities understand the issues and are ready to get into it. It's hard to make progress. And the third is project development and thinking about the right scales for project development. So really our work in the Maine West area really followed that trajectory to some degree. We dived into this work with I think of now as frankly a kind of a preliminary planning grant from the Connect Maine Authority to work on this, to dive into this in the Maine West area, which is again 27 towns in the Oxford Hills, Bethel, and Rumford River Valley areas. And so we got into that, and we spent about a year, a little over a year on that. and really, I think in the end, what that produced was a higher level of understanding and engagement with the issue among communities across the region, a high level sense of community goals and some of the strategies that could be relevant to the work. And along the way, really a much deeper understanding of, to Charlie's point, the existing providers, existing service that was available, work that was underway. So we came out of that process with kind of a big picture concept for this big region. And frankly, implementation moving forward from that was really slowed by the readiness and capacity at a community level for municipal leaders, select boards to really dive into this issue. There were pockets, but really, frankly, it was, I think we were probably a little bit ahead of people, of the communities. And they came partway in the initial planning process, but not quite far enough. So recognizing that, again, I'll say again, this is all in partnership with Community Concepts Finance Corporation. So any credit or blame I share with Mia Purcell. But we also had some funding from the Maine Community Foundation to organize what we called the Maine West Broadband Boot Camp. And we found this to be a super constructive process, honestly. It was a 7-part series over about 6 months, with, again, sessions ranging from 35 to 40 people from about a dozen communities, really geared specifically at providing participants with the understanding of the issue and paths forward that they could start to take action, either individually as towns or in collaboration. And that project really, it included a basic broadband 101, a dive into the return on investment or the value of investing in broadband, understanding the different technologies that are available to deliver service, understanding different financing mechanisms, an opportunity to meet with representatives of ISPs that serve the area, and a session on digital equity and inclusion. Through that process, there were about a dozen communities that participated. At least 8 of them are now being served by new local community broadband committees, most of which have either direct financial or at least conceptual support by their select board. So that process essentially built up the capacity either of municipal leaders or of local community leaders who were then able to connect with their municipal leaders to dive more deeply into this issue. So really, again, part of our regional approach was bringing a regional program to that readiness question and increasing the ability of communities to really dive into this issue. So now with that, again, we've got new committees serving about eight communities. And so now they're really diving into this stuff and frankly, exploring what the right scales of collaboration are. In the greater Bethel area, in the Mahoosic region, there are, I think it's 5 communities and 2 unorganized territories that have formed the Mahoosic Community Broadband Committee, with both kind of conceptual and financial support provided by each of those towns and the county commissioners. There's a group that is looking at opportunities for collaboration kind of along and across the Western Cumberland and Southern Oxford County borders. There's a community in Denmark that just received a planning grant, and as part of their work, they're actually talking to other communities in their school district. And that's a piece that we have found in at least a really interesting scale of collaboration is the school district scale. So it's communities that have experience working together, essentially funding a program, which is the school. So they have relationships, they have a common identity often. And that's a scale that we're really interested. That's the scale that the Mahoosic group is working at. So through this process, we have action in, again, about a dozen communities who are really, again, they're looking at their local options, but in all cases, they're looking at where are the opportunities for the right scale of regional collaboration. And then the other piece I would point to is we recently opened a conversation with the county commissioners here in Oxford County to take at least a look at, is there an opportunity and a feasibility of creating an actual county level municipal broadband utility. This is a very preliminary conversation. but that's another scale that we're really interested in. And again, that comes into play thinking about federal funding and how to best position this region to capitalize on federal funding that's coming through, and the potential value of having a formal public entity in place to accept and manage funding. Just closing, I think the challenges and lessons that we've taken from this are, one, capacity. Our ability to bring a regional lens to it, to have a local partner in Community Concepts, to be really digging in and doing that hand holding by individual towns has been super important. I would predict there would be very, very little action in this area without that level of essentially organizing capacity. Another challenge that we've run into, this comes to the data question, and I'm not going to beat this up too much, but I think we all know that data is a real challenge. Publicly available data is not typically not a true reflection of what is available on the ground. And to address that, in part, we've partnered with Maine Broadband Coalition and its speed testing initiative. And in the Mahoosic area, they've contracted with a consultant to do that road by road, real-time truth testing of exactly where is their service, who is it provided by. And that's really fundamental. It's, to Charlie's point, you kind of can't do anything until you really have that accurate data, because that's what you need to scope out your needs and projects. And then I think that's the final challenge moving forward is we have committees in place. We have regional collaborations in place. All these groups have goals. They have an increasingly solid handle on their data, on their maps, on their needs. And so now, frankly, this is kind of the hard part, is for them to navigate all the different options, whether it's working with an individual service provider, looking at, again, public ownership of infrastructure, regional broadband utilities. There's a lot of options out there, and it's complicated. And so that's the other place where we feel like it's really important, and we're committed to providing ongoing technical assistance, not just on the organizing and capacity piece, but to help committees that have come together that are looking at things regionally to navigate that system. One, to identify what is the approach that they want to take. Do they want to do something community-wide? Do they want to just fill their holes? And then once they've made that determination, really developing the project and navigating what can be there's a lot of resource out there, but it's not like it's just showing up. There's a lot of work, and there can be some real complication in putting these financing packages together for these projects. So I will close there again with the big points that I would emphasize through this is the need to invest in capacity, the need to invest in readiness, and the need for real high-level technical assistance to help communities once they reach that readiness and have their goals in place, to navigate that process to determine the exact right approach, and then to put together the financing and implementation projects. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And you touched just a little bit about what it's like to have communities working together, and throughout Maine, when it comes to communities partnering up, sometimes it's existing relationships that equal kind of the best partnerships for broadband. Can you talk a little bit about how you've engaged the school district and the communities around that partnership to move broadband forward, or move those conversations forward?
Yeah, and honestly, that's something that we looked at in general when we started looking at the Maine West initiative, which again, we knew the general area that we were focusing on, but in the end, we determined school districts as the boundary for that. It actually encompasses 4 school districts, that region in general. And so now, as we've dived into it, particularly in the Mahoosic area, it's the natural affinity. Actually, the communities that were participating in the boot camp from the Mahoosics, none of them actually had enough people participating in the boot camp to form up a committee, but there were 1 or 2 representatives from all of these communities that were directly adjacent to each other, and they were all part of the same school district. So it was natural for them to come together and form a committee. And then through that process, explicitly recruited essentially the technology director for SAD 44, who again helps to put that overlay on it, helps communicate with the school system, with the school district, so that the school district is in the loop and understands where this work is at and is available as a partner. And interestingly, we're seeing, again, very early, but again, in kind of the middle of Oxford County, I don't know the school district number, but again, through the work that folks in Denmark and Freiburg have done, again, there are early conversations there as well as of looking at that school district scale. Again, to my point before, I think there's a couple of things that play there. One is identity. You avoid, frankly, the fact that people don't want to collaborate with people from another school district because they competed against them in basketball in high school. And you have so it's natural, it feels natural to people. And you do have those communities, those select boards do have some experience with a shared investment where they're all committing funding on a regular basis to a big project, which is their schools. So the idea of doing that around something like broadband isn't completely foreign.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. And Charlie, I know you had to switch to phone. Are you still with us for a question? Okay, doesn't seem like Charlie is with us. So we'll follow up with Charlie on, I know Jen Peters was asking a little bit around surveys and what those kind of top 2 or 3 questions might be. So we'll follow up directly in the chat on that.
We also did significant surveying as part of the boot camp process. I don't have the data in front of me, but part of it definitely had to do with, what do you use it for? And consistently, it's across the board. People use it for business. People use it for education is a super important piece, increasingly telehealth. And again, in the past year, it may have skewed, I'm sure it skewed things a bit, but increasingly the idea of working from home was a really key piece of that. And one of the other things we asked is, how satisfied are you with your current service? And those numbers didn't come out super high.
Yeah, and I think one question that a lot of our coastal and island communities ask, because we're looking more at affordability now than we have before, is, what's the maximum you're able or willing to pay for your service? And framing it like that gets you more at what's affordable for them instead of, wouldn't everyone like to pay $10 for internet someday? So framing it that way, but we'll follow up with a couple of some top questions and potentially some examples of what communities have used for surveys for you, Jen. This has just been a couple of regional examples. There are several throughout Maine, and because this is a networked infrastructure and communities are acknowledging broadband as a priority more and more throughout the past year and a half, there are more models that are coming up. Regional utilities are really taking lead, and a lot of communities along the coast and inland Maine are looking at, what does it look like to form a utility, to commit to guiding principles. We have a group in the mid-coast area that was able to get communities signed on to those and get the political will backing the initiative from the beginning. So I think there are lots of examples. You'll hear about them, and if you're interested in them, I would say continue to follow up with the Maine Broadband Coalition and others, because there's a wealth of knowledge, not just in the panels that you hear today, but also in some of the attendees and the community members that have been leading this charge. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Andrew for the next portion.
Amazing timing. 9:59 on the dot. Great work, Kendra Jo. Thank you, Mike, Charlie, and Mia, for those quick snapshots of the great work you've been doing with multiple communities in your region and in your counties. And I do want to just sort of underscore a point that Kendra Jo just made, in that there are a number of excellent examples. There are a number of excellent examples of multi-regional and multi-community efforts throughout the state, and many are at different stages of evolution. I know, we've got folks from the greater East Grand region that have been doing great work. I know there are folks from the Kennebec region that have been doing great work. this conversation really is a start to try to help provide more consistent structure, support, guidance, and help us as a broadband coalition know how best to support your collective efforts. One small way that we can do that, and I'll talk more about it later, but one small way we can do it is to help facilitate more ongoing conversations between you and your thoughts and efforts around regional broadband planning. And maybe that happens at a specific county level. And so we have launched a new feature to the Broadband Coalition website. It's called the Forums. Think of this as like a Google group, except with a specific focus on either a place or a topic that you want to focus on. So we've set up a forum for each of Maine's counties, and we can add more forums as you go. I'll talk about this in a minute, but I do just want to highlight that if you want to continue these conversations at a place-based or at a topic level, go to the Broadband Coalition, go to the forum page, and you'll be able to set up a forum or contribute and participate in a forum conversation. So we're going to come back to that and discuss a little bit more. Ooh, thank you, Clara. I apparently was sharing the wrong screen. Hopefully it wasn't my personal email. I will share the right screen in the future as we talk about it, but I'm going to stick to our agenda, which, up next, part of what we wanted to do in today's conversation is really emphasize the role of not just multi-jurisdictional, multi-community efforts from a regional standpoint, but really multi-sector engagement. As Peggy framed out, this is sort of uncharted waters for us as a state in thinking about how to make the most of federal resources. Local governments are empowered with resources, county governments are empowered with resources. Broadband is a designated and eligible expense. We have major broadband needs. While the state is putting an unprecedented level of investment into broadband, it really is only a partial level of investment that is needed to get to our connectivity needs. And so thinking about how we stack hands from a multi-sector standpoint is a critical issue for us to explore. And so we wanted by design today to work with the network of co-hosts and think about how to provide perspective around how to engage with different sectors from different perspectives. And the groups that we've engaged representing economic development districts, school districts, public health districts, municipalities, county level efforts are a pretty good starting point. It's by no means exhaustive. Network Maine is a partner in today's conversation. We weren't even able to get institutions of higher learning or libraries fit into today's agenda, but certainly those are the types of stakeholders that are critical in thinking about community broadband planning, let alone regional level. And so I'd like to start, we're going to hand off to Chris Hall, Director of Regional Initiatives at the Greater Portland Council of Governments. It's my favorite council of governments, and it certainly, I think, illustrates the tremendous opportunity that we as a region and we as a state have right now. And so, Chris, thanks for getting us started in this lightning round and helping participants really think about how can we engage EDDs? How can we engage councils of governments in broadband planning and development conversations?
Well, Andrew, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. And I want to start with a little demystification. If you asked the U.S. Department of Commerce's Economic Development Administration, they would tell you that an economic development district, what Andrew just referred to as an EDD, is a multi-jurisdictional organization that produces a locally based, regionally driven development planning process. That's a whole lot of words, but what it really means is that in Maine, we have 7 agencies who are charged by the federal government with developing comprehensive economic development strategies, which we also refer to in code as CEDS, C-E-D-S. Each one of those plans are a 5-year blueprint for regional economic growth. Now in Maine, 4 of our 7 EDDs happen to be councils of government, including Andrew's favorite one. But we also have economic development corporations serving in that role and a regional planning commission. what all of them have in common are really the four things that I want to point you to in a lightning fashion as resources as you do your broadband work. First of all, there's that plan that I referenced, the CEDS, the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategies document, is a wonderful place to see what your region is thinking about its assets, about its liabilities, about its plans for advancing prosperity. It's a living document. It is always open to amendment. And if broadband isn't in there, and I expect it is, then it can be in the future and represents an important conversation. The second thing that EDDs possess are local networks. Many times the economic development district is composed of municipal leaders, nonprofit leaders, private sector leaders, all sitting around tables talking about their region's economic future. This is a network that undoubtedly touches your work, but also touches a lot of other work that's affected by broadband. Those networks are valuable allies. The third thing is regional expertise. Every one of our economic development districts has been doing development for a very long time. And as a result, they know their regions really well and can speak to how broadband can be uniquely shaped in the region for the specific needs of an area. To the extent they are not at the table, I urge you to engage them because you will learn things and they will improve your work product. And finally, every economic development district has access to resources. The Economic Development Administration, the US EDA, is just one of the places where EDDs go to get funding to invest in infrastructure and in planning. So there are opportunities to work through your EDDs to find resources that can complement the money that we have dedicated to broadband. Everything that economic development districts do is touched by broadband development. And all of your broadband work touches everything that economic development districts do. So the conversations will be rich, the partnerships will be strengthening, and I urge you to reach out to your regional economic development district and engage them. And Andrew will provide you with the resources to do that in some magical way that he always has. Andrew, was that 3 minutes? I'm telling you.
That was impressive, Chris. Thank you. And I think folks attending can appreciate, I've asked our 5 panelists here to go through lightning round in 3 minutes or less, talk about how best to engage their sector and organization type, which is a really heavy lift. Chris, that was excellent. Thank you. I'm hearing get your broadband in a CEDS. And let's get the EDA to fund broadband in Maine. And let's work with our EDDs to do so. Thank you, Chris, for that. I'm going to hand to Heather Perry, Superintendent of Gorham Schools, to speak next about how we've heard a little bit about engaging school districts from Mike in Maine West. But Heather, can you give us a little bit more perspective, please?
Yeah, well, I loved what Mike had to say earlier about school systems and their ability to sort of work together in already formed oftentimes, not all the time, oftentimes multi-town kind of regional aspects, and they're already working together, and they already have the sort of, go Spartans or whatever that is, that point of pride that's local. That's a great way to work with school systems. I also wanted to say, school systems have, I think, we've been sort of spoiled over a period of time with our access, but the pandemic, the past 18 months, has absolutely pointed out to school systems across the state the importance of not only our ability to connect at the school level in our school facilities, but also for our parents and our children and their families to connect. And not only that, but also not only the families, but also daycares, early child care centers, and also like municipal facilities that are housing, recreation programs and those kinds of things, because our students over the past 18 months have had to have access while they're in those various spaces to full academic and educational programming. And if that access wasn't there, there was a significant impact to that for our students. And so I think schools are very, very open to these conversations. I think they're really a cheerleader for these kinds of conversations to be occurring at the local level. And I think you'd find them to be very, very open partners. And I'm speaking from my perspective, not only as a superintendent in Gorham Schools, but also I'm a member of the executive board for MSSA. I'm the chair of the funding committee, and I'm also on the governing board for AASA. So I have a statewide perspective. I spent time in school systems from Gorham. I was a superintendent in RSU3, superintendent in Greenville and Jackman area, and I grew up in the Machias area. So I just got to tell you, I see the state, I understand the state and its broadband connection issues. And schools are going to be very, very happy partners, I think, if folks were to reach out to them. They have some great infrastructure too. Most school systems, if they don't have a technology director, they've got somebody that's in charge of technology in the school system. And so there's somebody with some area of expertise and understanding what is available in the region or the area that you're working with. I think they also, schools have been working with technology, especially through MLTI and the statewide program that's been in place now since the former Governor Angus King was in play, where we've done a lot of work in the hardware, in training, in professional development. That could really be assets, I think, to regional conversations around, around broadband and the issues. You talk about the need to educate people. Well, that's what we do. That's our job. And so, can we be partners in those kinds of areas? I think it's really, really important to think about schools as full-blown members of these kinds of regional conversations about broadband and the importance of broadband. Also, school systems have resources to tap into, not just people or human resources, but also capital. We have access to funding for E-rate funding, for example. That could be something that would absolutely align with some of the work of broadband in the community. We have, access to title and federal funds for title funds, and also for local entitlement, which is for special education and special needs students and families, that has an ability to provide devices and provide connectivity for families that are in need for specialized programming. So there's a lot of resources that schools have. And when we talk with our municipal partners, we know that we're a pretty large portion of most budgets and most tax bills. And so we're very, very open to wanting to be part of a solution in these areas to benefit our community. So I guess I would just say, wrap up with that piece, that I think school systems make excellent partners, as Mike and others pointed out earlier. I would certainly look to them for some of the resources that I described earlier.
Heather, that is excellent. Thank you so much again. I know an impossible task of talking about how best to engage school districts in 3 minutes or less. It's amazing. I'm hearing schools spreading the message, tapping into technical assistance and expertise, tapping into ability to access funding that others can't, and working within the system and boundaries that folks already relate to and are a part of and share a common bond with. So thank you, Heather, so much. I'm now going to hand to Rebecca Boulos of the Maine Public Health Association to speak a little bit about the role of the public health sector and how best to engage, whether it's health districts or public health agencies. Thank you, Rebecca, for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you, can't quite see you, which is okay if that means that we can hear you.
Yeah, okay, good. Well, as long as you can hear me. So I think I'll just start by talking a little bit about how broadband is a public health and a health equity issue. Sometimes that cannot be necessarily that clear. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has done a lot of research looking at determinants of health, and what they've found is that our zip code is in fact a stronger predictor of our health status than our genetic code. And that really just underscores that where we live matters. And that, while there are factors like clean air and clean water and education, employment, social connections, those factors impact our health, but broadband impacts access to those factors. And in fact, it's been considered a super determinant of health because it is a gateway to all these different services. So, adults can apply for and search for jobs. They can take online courses and trainings. They can engage with the legislative process, like all of us have had to do this session, doing it virtually. telehealth, we've seen an explosion in that use during the pandemic. And we've actually seen an increase in the usage of audio only because of limitations with broadband access. And so if we're able to continue expanding broadband access across the state, then it can make it easier for people to have an even more, I think, a stronger connection with their provider beyond the audio only service. Through email and social network sites, broadband can reduce social isolation and loneliness, which are two surprising, I think, sometimes contributing factors to poor health outcomes, particularly among older adults. And in fact, though social isolation and loneliness has been linked to high blood pressure, heart disease, obesity, a lot of other chronic health conditions. And so when we're talking about connectivity, I think keeping in mind on the other end, the very real health consequences, physical, emotional, behavioral, mental health consequences associated with access to broadband. I do want to share, and I'll put this in the chat, but there's a tool from the Federal Communications Commission that's called Mapping Broadband Health in America. And it allows you as a user to visualize, overlay, and analyze broadband and health data at the county level, as well as the state and the national level. And so not only does it show clearly that there are associations between health disparities and broadband access, but it also allows you to see what those disparities are in your area. And just like I said, really underscores that broadband access is a public health and a health equity issue. To your question about engaging with the public health sector, I encourage other sectors to think about broadband a little bit outside the box. Like I said, like how can it impact our physical health? Certainly our social connections, but also, like I said before, some of these physical health impacts. And so that might help you identify some non-traditional partners at the local, at the regional, or at the county level that can help advance this work. And so along those lines, in terms of either key resources or partners, there are other professional organizations like ours, Maine Hospital Association, Maine Primary Care Association, Maine Medical Association, Maine AARP, and I think Pat's still on. I saw her on earlier. And so while these are statewide organizations, their members are not. And so these are people that are in your communities that do care about this issue, and they understand how it's impacting the care of their patients or the populations that they serve, and so they can be helpful partners in this work. There are also, I don't know if everybody knows this, but Maine's organized into 9 public health districts, 8 that are geographic and 1 that is tribal. And each of those districts has a coordinating council. They each have a health improvement plan. And so being connected with your public health district and its coordinating council can also be one way to support your regional effort on broadband access. And I just as an example of that, I know, there's as the membership within those councils represent different organizations. And I know that with Maine West, for example, the Oxford County Wellness Collaborative and River Valley Healthy Communities Coalition, and I think Mike had mentioned earlier, Community Concepts, they're all part of Maine West. And so there are already public health nonprofits, coalitions, organizations that are tuned into this and ready and wanting to be part of this work. And so I will just end by saying that we've put together a list of some of those organizations that we know of, and we're happy to share that. We organized it by COGS and regional planning organizations. So we've tried to do it at that level in case it is helpful, and that we've included the district that you're in, but also some of these organizations that may be interested. We have a pretty wide-reaching membership across the state and in different areas of public health. And so if we can be helpful in either connecting you to those organizations or just as an association being helpful with your work, we definitely want to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I don't know why, but I feel like thinking about public health is pretty fresh on the perspective for a lot of us. Something been happening lately on the public health front, and I think really, really important to hear you emphasize that broadband is a critical issue in considering public health and resolving public health concerns and challenges. And I definitely think that we will take you up on your sharing of that resource list, which we'll host on the Broadband Coalition resources page. And also want to, you mentioned the role of telehealth, which is certainly an important component that has its own universe of funding and technical considerations and tremendous partners like the Northeast Telehealth Resource Center, which is a member of the Broadband Coalition's Advisory Committee, and certainly AARP is also a key member of the Broadband Coalition's Advisory Committee. So thank you so much, Rebecca, for that. Way to hit on some excellent notes. We're going to change gears and to speak through broadband considerations from a municipal standpoint, and in particular from a municipal broadband planning committee. So Carlos, I'm going to hand to you to speak to your experience with Georgetown.
Yeah, I think, I'll try to hit a few takeaways. There's a lot of things that have already been sort of covered in terms of that I'll hit on in capacity and on what a town can and cannot do. But I do want to just sort of lay into the conversation we just had. I think it's one of the things that when we were starting our process a couple of years ago, healthcare and education both were not even part of the conversation. And so I am really very excited that both healthcare and education are starting to become involved in these projects. And I really think that it'll be great if they would interact with the communities, even at the project planning stage. I think that would be a really great change. One thing to understand is all of our conversations today are really focused on building the infrastructure. So building the project out to connect us all. I'm really hoping that at some point over the next year or two, we're going to start having conversations about how to leverage broadband. But most of these conversations have been about how to build infrastructure. The most important thing I think that in engaging your municipality or our experience is that, for 4 years, we really struggled to get people across the community to understand the benefit of broadband. It was as some people have said, surveys, education, bringing people in, town meetings, that honestly, at this point, I think the conversation has truly changed. Except for some people, for the most part, everybody's had a direct experience with the impact of substandard broadband on their lives. And so as a community, as you're organizing, if you haven't already, you can build on that from the start now, where you can go into specific examples that have hit everyone on why they need to change the infrastructure that is available to them. Having said that, the real issue that most communities face pretty quickly is capacity, and it's really within most communities, there isn't really a lot of experience either at the select board level or maybe even the planning board level on larger infrastructure projects. So you rapidly run into that issue where people don't know where to start. There have been planning grants from Connect Maine. There is resources at Island Institute. There are other places that will help you with that planning process. But the most important thing is to be really deliberate about bringing those assets together to be able to understand first what an infrastructure project means, to understand that broadband is just another construction project. It's a big one. But then the most important part, the part that always sort of seems to stop the communities, is the funding issue. Understand how to evaluate the various funding efforts, how to evaluate what they all mean versus the structure, and be able to form that political will to be able to make a decision on how you want to go forward. And those are the things that, I think understanding the project itself is relatively straightforward. But it is really that sort of having the people in place that can evaluate and can understand how to do the different financing options and then be able to sell that to the community. And there are increasingly more resources there, but to everyone here that is not a municipality, is talking to municipalities, it's really structuring these conversations in ways that takes into account that the people you're talking to tend to be volunteers who have not had a lot of sophistication or a lot of experience necessarily in working on projects like this. And then if you go to a regional conversation, as has already been mentioned by Mike and others, there are a lot of times a community hasn't really participated in a regional conversation. And so that's almost entirely new to them. So that's sort of, I'm trying to do a 3-minute sort of overview, but that's sort of some of the things that I think about when when I'm trying to talk to other communities about some of the things they need to look out for. So happy to take questions.
Thank you, Carlos, so much for that. And certainly we've got a full agenda today. And I think your perspective on, one, the role of volunteers with municipal committees is important to bear in mind. And the work that has happened in Georgetown is certainly at the advanced end of the spectrum. And so kudos to you and your committee on that front. But also a good reminder that the structures of municipalities and town government are critical components of those committees. And that's why it's so wonderful to have Maine Municipal Association as a co-host for today, and that we think about how can we get the right level of learning and education and engagement among town officials to help support those volunteer efforts. So Carlos, thank you for emphasizing that point. And Mary Ellen Barnes, thank you so much for hitting cleanup here from Lincoln County Planning Commission perspective, and thinking about excellent work that you've already been doing in Lincoln County, and what other countywide agencies should be thinking about.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to be a part of this for sure. And for most of you who know me, you know I have an ability to tell long stories, but Andrew's asked me not to tell long stories. So we've been involved with broadband work since maybe 2008, 2009. In 2018 or so, we brought together 7 towns, and we used a Connect Me planning grant to start the processes there. And it was really interesting. Back to Mike's point about capacity and readiness, it was great to have 20 or so people in one room learning at the same time about broadband and what 25/3 means and all that kind of good stuff. And though towns have gone their own ways, 2 or 3 of them have already gotten Connect Me grants for infrastructure work. We're germinating another process in another part of Lincoln County. So I'm kind of excited about sort of the continuing education work that we've done. And I would just, I know Lincoln County may be unique in the sense that we are a county department, and I do economic and community development, and my colleagues do fantastic work in coastal issues and transportation. So we're really working on behalf of the county, and that may be unusual. But I would, again, we're a very small county. I think of us as rural, Maine West, but we're not as rural as you, but it has really impacted how our communities, whether it's Jefferson or Noblesboro, whether they see themselves as being, whether they have a role in economic and community development. I would say that recently, Jefferson has been really making progress with their plans for broadband, and Noblesboro has just gotten started. So we recognizing the cultural and maybe the sort of the economic view that these communities have that kind of vary. And I won't go into the whole 9 yards. So what I will say for the present, which is very exciting for us, is that our staff has been asked by the county commissioners, who we report to regularly and educate regularly, to facilitate a process for making recommendations for the American Rescue Plan funding. So even though this county is receiving several $1 million, and it's $7 million, that's a unique opportunity here. And if there's anyone around on the meeting today that would like to be involved in that process or give us some input to that, we'll be working on that for the next couple of months. But we've reached out to municipal leaders, county leaders. We've got a couple other stakeholder meetings coming up in July and no doubt August. But we're trying to, given all the eligible uses there are for the ARP dollars, we're trying to make some thoughtful recommendations to the county commissioners. And I think that's a unique role for the county anyways, in Maine. So happy to report back on how that works out, but obviously broadband is a priority for this region, and for all the reasons that you good folks have talked about earlier. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that really sorts itself out, and as other people have spoken, how does that leverage other resources at the federal and state level? So stay posted, and hopefully we'll have some great recommendations to the county commissioners.
Mary Ellen, thank you so much for that perspective, and certainly there's more to discuss than there is time for. And
Yeah.
I think proof is in the pudding based upon the work and the engagement and the planting and the data, the planning, the data collection and the planting that Lincoln County has embarked upon. There are several initiatives, there are several projects and partnerships and primed communities. So you have this really rich environment to be working with. And so it's an excellent example for us. And as a result, there's competition, there are options to be
Absolutely.
considering, there's capital to be stacking. And so as we wrap up, and I know we're coming down to the wire, although we've answered many questions through the Q&A feature, this really is the beginning of an ongoing conversation. And again, we wanted to provide perspective to attendees on how to take this broadband planning process back to your place, to think about multi-jurisdictional coordination, multi-sector coordination. In an effort to sustain ongoing conversation, there are a number of pathways to doing that. I'm going to attempt to share the right screen now, and somebody just yell at me if I'm not, but I should be sharing a page of the Maine Broadband Coalition forum here, which is, again, a new tool that we've set up to help enable county scale planning processes. So again, this is one tool, but as Aroostook County launches its broadband planning dialogue, this is an opportunity where we can share speed test data, which is available to anybody who requests it at a county level. We kicked off their planning process, and so here's a recording of their dialogue. And this can be a way in which places concentrate their coordinated multi-sector conversations moving forward. Again, and that's at the Maine Broadband Coalition.org forums page right here. The other thing that's been touched upon is the need for more education. And so I do want to highlight that everyone has said that there's a need for more information and more knowledge. The Broadband Coalition is going to be kicking off a community of practice, building from the community-driven process, the Maine West Boot Camp process that Mike and Kendra Jo and Mia spoke to. We are going to be looking to recruit attendees to participate in ongoing trainings in a community of practice for these regional efforts. So if you haven't already completed this form, which I am going to post in the chat here as well, please do so, and or please nominate somebody that you think should participate. Again, our bench is not deep enough as far as people that are contributing to this, to a volunteer process at a community scale. They're contributing to a coordinated multi-community effort. Please think about joining this community practice and or nominate somebody to join this community of practice, and we will follow up. I'm so sorry for holding people up a little bit. It's 10:32. This has been a very good conversation. This webinar, as well as the PowerPoint shared, will be available on the Broadband Coalition's webpage under resources. Thank you all very much. We are looking forward to continuing these conversations at a regional scale. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, a wonderful weekend, and we'll be in touch.